Bromance, that twisted, misshapen word which modern society has created to mask the desperate search for meaning and community in an alienated world. Bromance, this ridiculous fusion of brother and romance, as if a deep platonic friendship between men couldn't stand in its own dignity, but had to be cloaked in the veil of romance. Bromance, a pathetic symptom of the times, where men, unable to articulate their deepest emotions directly, resort to caricatured terminology to both mask and reveal their bonds. It is a tragedy that such terms seem necessary, a pathetic concession to the superficiality of modern existence, where genuine, unadulterated friendship must be dragged through the template of a fashionable linguistic construct. Bromance, one might say, is the monument of postmodern isolation, a desperate attempt to erect an oasis of familiarity in the cold social desert, while entangling oneself even deeper in loneliness. A word that, in its paradox, reveals both the closeness and the distance that gape between people of this time, unable to grasp and accept the true nature of their relationships. Yet in Neunkirchen there existed indeed one of those strange male friendships that would be labeled as bromance in today's world, overloaded with idiotic neologisms. Neunkirchen, a charming little town in Lower Austria that harmoniously combines its rich history with its modern lifestyle. Nestled in a picturesque landscape, Neunkirchen offers both locals and visitors a variety of attractions and amenities. The industrial boom that once shaped the city's image has passed, but Neunkirchen has successfully reinvented itself. Today, it is known as a shopping city, appreciated far beyond the region's borders. The downtown area, characterized by historic buildings and cozy alleys, is a bustling attraction. Around the main square, the Holzplatz, and along Triesterstraße, Fabriksgasse and Wienerstraße, numerous shops, boutiques and cafes invite you to stroll and linger. Another highlight of the city is the commercial area Am Spitz, a modern shopping center offering a wide range of shopping opportunities. Here, you can find everything your heart desires, from fashion to electronics to culinary delights. Neunkirchen has managed to bring tradition and modernity into harmony, creating a lively and attractive shopping landscape. In this Neunkirchen, this peculiar blend of tradition and modernity, existed a male friendship that, in its uniqueness and intensity, enriched the everyday life of the town. This friendship manifested in daily visits to a gym, a place of physical culture and sweat, where the two men, as different as they might have been, found a peculiar, almost symbiotic connection. One, a short but dominant man with thin legs that stood in odd contrast to his magnificently trained, muscular upper body, was known to all as Shorty. His appearance was a curiosity in itself, but in his presence lay an undeniable power. Shorty ruled the gym. His words were law, and his dominant speeches echoed off the walls as if they were sermons to a faithful congregation. By his side, always attentive and ready, was his submissive buddy, whom they called Puppy. Puppy, dressed like an old rocker, his hair already grey-white but still long and wild, wore his leather jacket like a second skin. Blue jeans and cowboy boots completed his look, which seemed to have sprung from a long-gone era when he walked through the entrance door. His facial expression, that of an innocent puppy, often looked up at Shorty reverently, especially when he gave his dominant speeches and drew everyone's attention. These two men, as unequal as they were, formed a fascinating pair. Shorty and Puppy, one short and muscular, the other medium height and slim, but both united in a strange but deep friendship that found its expression in the daily rituals of the gym. While Shorty gave his commands and operated the machines with almost military precision, Puppy followed him with loyal eyes, always ready to execute every command and follow every instruction. For the attentive guests in Neunkirchen's gym, it was always a fascinating spectacle to watch the unusual friendship of this unequal pair, whose clothing styles couldn't have been more different. Puppy, the wild old rocker, appeared in his characteristic outfits, the grey long mane blowing out from an old leather jacket, his blue jeans tight, and the cowboy boots worn, but full of history. His facial expression, innocent and dreamy like that of a puppy, rounded off the image of a man who seemed to live in the past while asserting himself in the present. Shorty, on the other hand, dressed with an elegance and sense of style reminiscent of an English gentleman of the 1920s and 1930s. His trench coat, impeccably cut and flawless, framed his muscular upper body and formed a sharp contrast to his thin legs. The checkered flat cap sat perfectly on his head, and his face bore a striking resemblance to the legendary Freddie Mercury, including the distinctive moustache, which gave him a certain theatrical flair. The clothing of the two men was not only a matter of style, but also an expression of their personalities and their special dynamic. Shorty, with his dominant presence and eccentric taste, exuded a kind of aristocratic authority. He moved with the grace and confidence of a man who knew he was drawing all eyes to him, and he visibly enjoyed it. His elegant appearance, which seemed out of place with the hard, sweaty activities in the gym, gave him an aura of the extraordinary, the nearly unattainable. Puppy, on the other hand, who appeared as a relic from another time with his leather jacket and cowboy boots, followed him with quiet devotion. The clothing of the old rocker reflected his inner rebellion and his longing for freedom, a freedom he paradoxically and completely found in the friendship with Shorty. His innocent puppy look, always directed at Shorty as he swung his dominant speeches and operated the machines with the precision of a conductor, showed a dedication that was almost touching. The two usually met before the entrance, as if to further emphasize the absurd importance of this meeting, and only went through the gym door together, like in a grotesque ritual, a ceremonial act that underscored their unshakable but ultimately pathetic connection. The roles in weightlifting were meticulously defined. Shorty, the determined commander, the self-appointed despot of this ridiculous microcosm, decided alone and unchallenged what, where, and how intensely was trained. Puppy just stood by, resigned to his fate, a silent actor in this daily, infinitely repeated play of submission and blind obedience. Puppy's existence was that of a willing extra, completely subordinating himself to the dominant staging of his master. Shorty was a strict observer when Puppy lifted weights. With eagle eyes, he watched every movement. No deviation from perfect execution escaped him. It often happened that Puppy was yelled at by Shorty for not performing the exercises cleanly and precisely. The harsh words echoed through the room, a mix of drill and care that only insiders could really understand. Puppy always responded with his inevitable puppy face, that innocent, almost helpless look, unable and unwilling to resist. Perhaps it was because Puppy knew deep down that his buddy was right. Shorty's strict control and relentless criticism were not just expressions of dominance, but also of a deep, almost paternal sense of responsibility. In this strange balance of power and submission, both found a kind of harmony that defined their friendship and made it grow beyond everyday boundaries. For the other guests in the gym, this spectacle was a daily highlight. Shorty and Puppy, who in their otherness and dynamic evoked a mix of fascination and pity, brought an unmistakable color to the grey, everyday life. Their relationship was a living testament to the fact that true friendship often finds expression in the most unusual forms and rituals. But it wasn't just about training. They often took long breaks between exercises, breaks that were almost as important as the training itself. It was Shorty who determined when these breaks occurred, and in those moments it was only he who spoke. Puppy, on the other hand, was the silent, attentive listener, following his friend's monologues with a keen eye and undivided attention. The topics of these monologues were as varied as the men themselves. Shorty talked about everything, from the latest political developments to philosophical reflections to stories from his own colourful past. His words filled the room with a kind of lively zeal that amused and impressed the other guests in the gym. Sometimes he lectured about proper training and the science behind it, then again about the merits of classic literature or the subtleties of English style, which he so masterfully embodied. Puppy listened, his expression always interested and open, but always with that slight look of childlike innocence and admiring devotion. He never contradicted, rarely asked questions, and only occasionally gave an approving nod. It was as if he knew that Shorty's words represented an inexhaustible source of wisdom and comfort for him. These breaks were more than just interruptions in training for Puppy. They were moments of enlightenment and learning. For the others in the gym, it was a familiar sight. Shorty, who in his elevated manner seemed like an eccentric professor giving his lessons, and Puppy, who hung on his words like a faithful student. This strange but deep connection between the two men gave the place a unique atmosphere, a mix of physical exertion and intellectual inspiration. Both were passionate advocates of electromobility, or rather, it was Shorty who, with his endless, insistent, and unbearably dogmatic speeches, convinced Puppy of this technology. It was no particular challenge, as Puppy's admiration and trust in Shorty's judgment were boundless, absurd, and ridiculous. Puppy's submissiveness, his unconditional acceptance of every opinion expressed by Shorty, made him a perfect target for Shorty's missionary zeal. This human anachronism named Puppy, who questioned nothing and believed everything Shorty said, was the perfect resonance for Shorty's technological sermons. Puppy's ability to feel comfortable in his submissive role made him the ideal victim for Shorty's overflowing, often grotesque passion for electromobility. Thus, the daily monologues about electromobility became bizarre, almost ritual acts where Shorty appeared as the tireless prophet and Puppy as his humble disciple. In their breaks between exercises, when Shorty gave the command to stop, he often devoted much time to this topic. Shorty spoke with the enthusiasm of a visionary about the advantages of electromobility, environmental friendliness, technological elegance, the quiet efficiency of the vehicles, the future potential of this development. He painted vivid pictures of clean, emission-free cities and the seemingly endless possibilities that electromobility opened up. Puppy, with his inevitable puppy face and attentive bright eyes, listened fascinated. For him, Shorty's words were not just information, but a revelation. Every argument, every passionate lecture further solidified Puppy's conviction. In these moments, there was no doubt or contradiction, only silent agreement and trust in Shorty's wisdom. If Puppy once dared to make a comment that sprang from his own thoughts, he was immediately reprimanded by Shorty. A particularly memorable incident, well remembered by the gym's guests, occurred after a passionate monologue by Shorty about the advantages of electromobility. Puppy, encouraged by the monologue, dared to address a small detail that, in his opinion, Shorty had overlooked and could be described as a potential market gap. Shorty's reaction was immediate and grim. With a facial expression that resembled 7 days of rain, he looked at Puppy and waved dismissively. "That's not a market gap. This service already exists," he said in a dismissive tone that brooked no contradiction. Puppy's face looked even more puppy-like in that moment, his eyes large and uncertain. All he could stammer was a quiet, embarrassed, "Oh." The other guests in the gym, who witnessed this scene, looked away awkwardly or exchanged furtive glances. It was a familiar spectacle. Shorty, the infallible commander, and Puppy, the loyal but always uncertain companion. This dynamic, unequal as it was, defined their friendship. Shorty's dominating presence and Puppy's submissive acceptance were like two sides of a coin, inseparably linked. After such moments, the usual routine quickly resumed. Shorty continued his explanations as if nothing had happened, and Puppy listened with renewed enthusiasm, carefully holding back his own thoughts. This small episode was a clear sign of the power dynamics within their relationship and showed how deep Puppy's admiration and respect for Shorty truly ran. They also liked to discuss TV programs, or rather, Shorty held his endless, excruciating monologues about them. Puppy stood by like a faithful dog, nodding eagerly, while Shorty pontificated with unbearable arrogance about the supposed highlights of a cheap music show. Shorty, with his presumptuous conviction and that obnoxious, arrogant charm, elevated even the most trivial and pathetic TV show to a cultural event of immense significance. Puppy's eager nodding, his unconditional agreement with Shorty's pompous statements, made the whole scene even more absurd. Shorty, the self-appointed culture apostle, who turned every banal TV show into a masterpiece of entertainment art, and Puppy, the gullible disciple, who accepted every one of these grotesque exaggerations as divine truth. In this absurd spectacle, the ridiculousness and tragedy of human existence, trapped in a vicious circle of presumption and blind obedience, became evident. With a voice that combined the authority of a self-appointed expert and the passion of a preacher, he spoke of the artistic flights of fancy and the hidden geniuses of the evening programs, which, for anyone else, were nothing more than trivial banter and musical kitsch. His words echoed through the room, as if they penetrated not only the deafening music, but also the souls of the listeners. Puppy, standing by in his old rocker attire, with his inevitable puppy face, could do nothing but nod eagerly and agree enthusiastically. Every remark, every judgment from Shorty was taken by him as irrefutable truth. The banal details of the shows became epic narratives, and Puppy's silent agreement was the applause Shorty expected and received. Once, something completely unexpected happened. Shorty, in a rare fit of generosity, surprised Puppy with the offer to choose the next fitness machine. Puppy, completely taken aback and visibly overwhelmed by this unexpected gesture, could not utter a single coherent word, only nervous stammering and helpless gestures. Shorty, whose patience was always on a razor's edge, immediately showed signs of irritation. His generous offer, which in his eyes was almost royal grace, simply could not be accepted by Puppy. It was simply impossible. Puppy's eyes, usually so attentive and obedient, looked even more helpless in that moment, his face a mask of confusion and irritation. "Fine," Shorty finally growled and took command again. "We'll continue with bench presses." He waved dismissively, as if to brush off a bothersome thought, and led Puppy to the next machine. Puppy's shoulders slumped slightly as he followed his friend, unable to bear the immense responsibility that had been placed on him for a brief moment. The other guests in the gym watched the scene with mixed feelings. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others exchanged amused glances. It was another episode in the ongoing play that Shorty and Puppy performed every day. A reminder that even in the strictly defined hierarchy of their friendship, surprises and misunderstandings lurked. Due to the high entertainment value for the other visitors of the gym, soon rumors began to circulate that the two were not real, but merely professional actors hired by the gym to entertain the visitors. It seemed almost too absurd to be true, this daily display of dominance and submission that seemed so perfectly staged, as if it were taken from a grotesque play. The way Shorty held his monologues, with that unmistakable mix of arrogance and authority, and how Puppy stood by, nodding eagerly like a faithful dog following his master unconditionally. It all couldn't be real. It was as if they had conspired to lead the spectators into an absurd world where the boundaries between reality and performance completely blurred. The other guests in the gym, caught between amusement and disbelief, couldn't help but wonder if they were part of a masterfully staged play, a play that exposed the ridiculousness and tragedy of human existence in its purest form. Suddenly, the two were gone. It was not the first time they had taken a creative break, but until now they always returned after a short time as if nothing had happened. This time, however, it was different. The break dragged on, they stayed away from the gym, and a strange, unbearable emptiness spread, an emptiness that weighed like an invisible burden on everyone. After what felt like an eternity, Puppy suddenly reappeared, alone. Something must have happened, a fight perhaps, or something even worse, but no one dared to ask. Puppy, the once so eager, loyal companion, looked dejected, sad, and only did the exercises half-heartedly, as if he had lost all will to live. The once familiar movements were now mechanical, empty, without meaning or purpose. Puppy's sad figure, alone among the machines, was a picture of being lost. The other visitors, accustomed to his former liveliness, his almost slavish agreement with Shorty's monologues, now watched him with silent, almost contemptuous sympathy. It was a sad sight, this once so eager and faithful companion, now like a ship without a captain, helplessly drifting in the meaningless expanse of the gym. After a while, Puppy began to slowly open up again. He seemed more positive, as if he had made an inner decision, a kind of desperate will to survive. That was the moment when he tried to engage in conversation with the people, pathetic attempts of a desperate man to find a foothold again. Many visitors, who had long known him by sight, immediately understood his intention. He was looking for another figure of leadership, someone like Shorty who gave him direction and meaning, without which he obviously could not exist. The whole sad truth of his dependency revealed itself in those moments of desperate search for a new master, a new source of patronage and dictate. Clearly, he was unable to train alone. He needed a guide, a despot who told him what to do, who drove, controlled, and patronized him. That was the moment where this absurd story ends. Whether Puppy would ever find a new Shorty again remains up to the reader, who ultimately asks whether it even matters. The moral of this sad farce is unmistakable. Some people are unable to exist alone. They always need someone to show them the way, to give them support and structure, even if it is only in the ridiculous microcosm of a gym. The whole thing reveals the pathetic truth that most people, like Puppy, remain in their helpless dependency, unable to endure the freedom of their own existence.